Women, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. We have a very special guest this evening. She has a unique perspective on the women's movement. Her involvement began when she was a child, and her mother took her to hear Susan B. Anthony. Her involvement continued to her graduation from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology School of Architecture in 1909 and continues until the present day. My guest is Ms. Florence Luscomb. Florence, thank you very much for coming.
I'm very happy to be here.
I forgot to mention your middle initial, which you asked me to do. Florence H., right?
Yes.
Can you tell me about your mother taking you to see Susan B. Anthony?
Well, my mother was a delegate to the National American Woman Suffrage Convention in 1892, and she took me with her then as a little girl of 5. Now, of course, at that age, I can't tell you about the business that was transacted, but there's just one thing that I feel very keen in my recollection, and that is that they said to me, "This woman who is speaking now is Susan B. Anthony."
Do you think you've been a feminist ever since?
I think I've been a feminist ever since. Susan B. Anthony converted me, shall we say.
Well, I can't think of anyone more marvelous to be converted by than Susan B. Anthony. How did the women's suffrage movement begin in this country?
How did it begin?
Yes, in this country.
In this country? It grew out of the anti-slavery movement. In those days, women were not supposed to take an interest in anything except their domestic affairs. But some of the more public-spirited women were so horrified by slavery that they wanted to join the anti-slavery societies and work with them. And in several of the states, they began to admit women into their societies. Then, in 1840, the British Anti-Slavery Society decided that they would call for a worldwide anti-slavery conference to be held in London. And they sent the notices of it to every country that had an anti-slavery organization, asking them to send accredited delegates. And the state of Pennsylvania included among its men delegates 5 women, and the state of Massachusetts sent 3 women. And when these 8 women appeared in London and presented their credentials, the British were horrified. They'd never dreamed that women would come. It was such an improper thing. And they spent an entire day debating whether they would seat these women with these official credentials. And at the end of the day, they voted that they would not seat the women. And one man exclaimed that now he was thankful because they were rid of the scum of the convention.
Who was the man who was on his way to the...
The most famous anti-slavery leader in the whole world at that time was William Lloyd Garrison.
Oh, right.
And his boat had been detained by bad weather in crossing the Atlantic, and he didn't arrive in London until the day after the women had been relegated to the gallery. And William Lloyd Garrison refused to present his credentials and take any part in this world conference, and sat instead in the gallery with the women throughout it all.
That was marvelous. So there were men at that time that were supportive of the women.
Practically all the great leaders in the anti-slavery movement were also supporting women's rights. Wendell Phillips went on the lecture tour for.
Who is Wendell
Emerson.
Phillips?
Wendell Phillips was one of the greatest leaders in the anti-slavery movement. Ralph Waldo Emerson supported the women's rights. So that you got the great leaders in social reform at that time, practically all of them supporting the women's movement. There were two of the women who were present, sitting in the gallery, and they vowed that when they got back to this country, they would call a conference on women's rights. One of them was a Quaker, Lucretia Mott, and the other was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was on her honeymoon trip. Well, it so happened that they lived far apart in different states. And in those days, you didn't just hop aboard an automobile and drive a few hours to get over to a neighboring state.
No, but gas was cheaper.
You might take a railroad. You might not even have any railroad going there. You might have to take a stagecoach. So that they were not able to carry out their plans until 1848, when Lucretia Mott was visiting in the town where Elizabeth Cady Stanton was then living. And so now, they said, they could carry out their plan. And they called a meeting. They drafted the call to the meeting. They drafted the resolutions that ought to be passed. But they did it all on just 5 days' notice, so that it was just a local meeting, and the immediately surrounding towns of Seneca Falls. But nevertheless, this was the first women's rights conference that had ever been held in the world.
In the world, not just in this country.
Not just in this country. 2 years later, in 1850, there was another conference held in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was a truly national conference. It had over 1,000 delegates coming from 11 different states, some of them as far away as California. Now, there was no railroad out to California, had been built then. You had to come by stagecoach up over the Rocky Mountains and across the prairies. But delegates came from California to attend the great Women's Rights Convention in Worcester, Massachusetts.
And that was just very shortly after Seneca Falls.
And that was 2 years later. That was in 1850.
Were Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton there also?
I think they were. I don't know that I've ever seen, but if they had found it possible to be there, they certainly would have been.
Let's talk about some of the conditions of women at that particular time that led to the meeting in Seneca Falls.
Yes. The law said man and wife are one, and that one is the husband. In other words, she was his personal possession. A married woman could not own any property. Any property that she owned became her husband's when they were married. Anything she inherited. If she worked and earned wages, her wages belonged to her husband, not to her. Their children belonged to him. He could give them away. He could even leave them by will, and they would be taken away from the mother and given to whomever the father had specified in his will. It might be a total stranger who lived far away, and the mother would never see her babies again. It was absolutely immoral for a woman to speak in public. when Lucy Stone started in speaking against slavery,
Now let's tell who Lucy Stone was.
well, she was one of the pioneers in the anti-slavery and women's rights movement. But when she began to speak in public, she was expelled from membership in her church for doing such an indecent thing as addressing an audience. That was in the 1850s.
So they were in effect persecuted because they were speaking out in public.
Yes.
All of them.
Yes.
Lucy Stone founded a newspaper, didn't she?
Lucy Stone and her husband, Henry B. Blackwell, founded the Woman's Journal.
And you brought a copy.
In 1870. Lucy Stone,
Tip it forward a little bit here.
this was the national weekly newspaper for the whole woman's movement. It was founded, as I said, in 1870 and continued right through until the final victory. This is a picture of Henry Blackwell, who was the husband of Lucy Stone.
He wanted to get married and she didn't.
She wanted to be married. They were deeply in love, but she said that she had got to give her life to the woman's cause. And he said he would give his life to the woman's cause too. And so they got married and had a devoted married life.
You also brought us a photograph of their daughter.
And they had one daughter, Alice Stone Blackwell, and this is her picture. And she, coming of that father and mother, devoted her life also to the woman's cause.
And we have another newspaper clipping of you selling this newspaper on street corners.
Yes, in 1910 and 1911, the publishers, the Henry Blackwell and Lucy Stone, were very anxious to spread out to a larger public for their magazine, for their newspaper. And they asked me if I would sell it as a newsboy on the streets of Boston. And for 2 years, every Saturday afternoon, I stood at the corner of Tremont Street and Winter Street selling the paper. But in order to be permitted to do that, I had to get a license as a hawker and peddler. And this is my license, granted to me in 1910.
I see on here that if you hadn't gotten a license, you would have been fined $1,000.
If I had been so rash as to sell it without being a hawker and peddler license.
Tell me about the women who were at that time trying to generate interest in their cause. What were their lives like?
You say at that time, do you mean...
Where you left off, when Lucy Stone was thrown out of her church.
Oh, well, they had the early days of the women's movement. There was Lucy Stone, there was Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the three outstanding figures. They converted hundreds and thousands of other women who took their part, did their part in building up this movement in every state of the Union, having meetings, circulating petitions, trying to get each state to amend its state constitution to allow women to vote. and of course, to try to get these very hideous discriminations against women in the laws amended by each state.
What were
And
the
they
ones that
gradually did succeed.
What were the ones that they concentrated on mostly beside the vote?
I think it was any of all of these. The right of a woman to own property. Certainly the right of a mother to have equal ownership in the children that she had born. These were all causes for which the women worked, and as I say, gradually were able to get state after state to pass laws, change their laws, abolishing these hideous oppressions of women.
Did they experience tremendous hostility, do you think?
The early pioneers, the women who went into the women's movement in the early days, were breaking all the traditions, and so that they met very great hostility.
You had something you wanted to read.
Oh,
It's by Anna Shaw.
this was from the autobiography of Anna Howard Shaw, who was a little bit younger than these than the first pioneers women, but nevertheless not many years later. And she tells about what it was like when you were going out into the countryside to speak at meetings, to try and get an organization set up in different cities and towns to carry on the work. And this gives an idea of what Lucy Stone and Susan B. Anthony and scores of other women had to endure in going forth to hold meetings. Dr. Shaw says, all-night journeys in freight cars, engines, and cabooses were casual commonplaces, while 30 and 40-mile drives across the country in blizzards and bitter cold were equally inevitable. Once during a 30-mile drive, when the thermometer was 20 degrees below zero, I suddenly realized that my face was freezing. In Kansas, I was chased by wolves, two huge, starving, tireless animals that hour after hour loped behind the cutter in which I sat with another woman driving me. They were so near that I could see their eyes and slavering jaws, and they were as noiseless as things in a dream. At last, little by little, they began to gain on us, and they were almost within striking distance of the whip, which was our only weapon, when we reached the welcome outskirts of a town, and they fell back.
They really had to care an awful lot about their cause to go through those conditions.
They cared about their cause more than they cared about their lives.
At what point did you become super active in the women's movement?
Well, all through my girlhood, through my school years and my college years, I did what I could do, what youngsters could do, and college girls. I was, as a youngster, I would usher at meetings and hand out leaflets and address envelopes. Then later on, about the time that I had graduated from college in '09, we began to have open-air street rallies, and I began to take a part in them.
Were you ever arrested?
No. Mostly they were not arrested then because we weren't violating any law.
You participated in a march in 1913 in Washington.
In 1913, 2 days before the inauguration of President Woodrow Wilson, they had called a parade in Washington. And there were about 8,000 women from all over the country who gathered there. There was a bunch of hoodlums who attacked the parade. They kicked the women, they spat on them, they tripped them up, they overturned the floats, and then they all bunched in and blocked the parade from moving. And the police stood there and did not lift a finger to protect the women. And finally, the city authorities sent for troops from the nearby fort to come and clear the parade march. I know because I was there and took part in that parade. About 2 years later, there was a great parade in New York City of 40,000 women and a good many men. And that was the largest parade that up to that time had ever been held in New York. We also had a parade in Boston in 1915. In all the cities, they were holding these great parades.
This was all because of the vote, trying to get the vote, right?
It was trying to get the vote. That was the outstanding issue that was left. The only Americans who were not allowed to vote were criminals, the insane, and women. And we didn't like the company.
Wyoming was the first territory where women were allowed to vote.
Gradually, the Great West, of course, was settled by pioneers who went out. And when in any one area the population was enough, Congress would set it up as a territory permitted to make its own laws, to elect its own government, and run its own local affairs. By 1869, Wyoming had a large enough population to be set up as a territory. And I wish I had time to tell some of the anecdotes, some of the stories about how they came about considering having in their state, in their territorial constitution that they were writing, the right of women to vote. But they did put that in, and so in all the territorial affairs, women took an equal part. A territory could not vote in national elections for president or vice president, or they could not send members of Congress or the Senate. But all their local territorial affairs, the women had the full political equality with their men.
Florence, we have 3 minutes.
What?
And there's a story that I'd like you to tell about the woman whose husband was an alien.
Oh, yes.
We have just 3 minutes left.
Oh. After women got the vote in 1920, I was put in charge of a little information service to help women who might have any difficulty in getting registered. And so I heard this story. In those days, a woman's nationality was that of her husband. So this woman had been an American woman born here of an old American family. She'd married a foreigner, so she became a foreigner. Then he got naturalized, so she became an American again. She went down to register to vote after the women's suffrage was carried in 1920. And the registrar said that she would have to bring down her husband's naturalization papers, otherwise she could not be registered. And he didn't think women should vote, and he wouldn't let her have them. It so happened that he went out on a business trip, and he found he needed some documents that were in his safe deposit box at the bank. And he sent her an authorization to go to his safe deposit box. And there she found his naturalization papers, and she grabbed them and dashed down and got registered. But except for that happy accident of being able to get hold of his naturalization papers, she would have been denied her legal rights.
I think that's a terrific story. Florence, I thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you for watching. I've been talking to Florence H. Luscomb, who is a suffragist. Good night.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.